The house was always quiet. Too quiet. For a mansion that stood tall over the hills filled with glass, art, and expensive silence, it felt more like a museum than a home. Every morning, the sound of polished shoes echoed through the hallway as the billionaire left for work. Behind him, he left a home full of things, but empty of laughter. His twin boys, both 5 years old, had been born deaf. They were bright, curious, and full of life, but their world was built on gestures and expressions. To others, it was silence, but to them, it was full of feeling. They lived with their father and a maid who cared for them every day. She wasn't fancy or rich, but she had something rare: patience and warmth. She treated the boys as if they were her own, spending hours teaching them how to communicate through signs, drawings, and smiles. Still, the house was lonely. The father often worked late, traveling, chasing meetings and deadlines. The twins only saw him briefly in the mornings, and even then, it was with hurried waves and distracted nods. But that one Thursday morning changed everything. The billionaire had returned home early from a meeting that got canceled. He didn't tell anyone. He just wanted a quiet moment to see his boys and to surprise them. Maybe even share breakfast together, something he hadn't done in weeks. As he opened the door, a faint vibration reached his feet, a deep rhythm, like soft thunder. The sound came from the kitchen. He frowned. He walked slowly through the hallway, briefcase still in hand. The closer he got, the clearer it became that it was music, loud enough to shake the air just slightly. It was strange, since the twins couldn't hear, and the maid never played music when he was home. Then he stopped. At the kitchen doorway, his eyes froze. There they were, his two little boys, standing barefoot on the kitchen counter, moving their small feet up and down in rhythm. Their hands waved in the air, their faces glowing with joy. Between them stood the maid, laughing, spinning lightly with her arms raised. Music played from a black speaker on the counter. The boys couldn't hear the song, but they could feel it. Their tiny hands pressed to the surface, feeling the vibration. They followed her movements, one beat behind but full of heart. She wasn't just dancing. She was teaching them how to feel rhythm through their bodies, how to experience joy without sound. It was beautiful. And shocking. The billionaire didn't move. His eyes widened in disbelief. His first thought wasn't admiration, it was confusion. Why was she letting them stand on the counter? Why was there loud music in his home? Why did she seem so free? For a moment he felt like a stranger in his own house. The maid turned around and froze. Her smile vanished. The twins stopped moving. The music hummed quietly between them. She quickly grabbed the remote and turned it off. Silence filled the air. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered softly. Her hands trembled. They wanted to dance. The billionaire didn't reply. He just stood there staring at his sons. The twins looked at him confused, then at the maid, sensing her fear. They didn't understand why their happy moment suddenly felt wrong. One of the boys tugged on his father's sleeve, smiling innocently, and signed something with his hands. The father blinked. He only recognized a few signs. He looked at the maid, who whispered gently, "He's asking you to dance." The billionaire's throat tightened. His briefcase slipped slightly from his hand. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He was used to numbers, meetings, screens, not emotions. The maid lowered her head. "I didn't mean to overstep, sir. They love feeling the music. It helps them connect." He didn't answer. He just turned toward his boys again. Their small faces, filled with joy moments ago, now looked uncertain. He took a deep breath, set his briefcase down, and looked around the kitchen. For the first time, he noticed something strange, how alive it felt. Fruit baskets, crumbs from breakfast, toys by the stool, a small drawing taped to the fridge. Things he never paid attention to before. Something shifted inside him. He realized this wasn't chaos. This was life. The maid stood still, ready to be scolded or even fired. But instead, the billionaire spoke quietly, his voice heavy with confusion and emotion. "How long have you been doing this?" She hesitated. "Almost every morning. They can't hear the music, but they can feel it. It makes them happy, sir." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. He didn't know how to respond. One part of him was upset, but another part, deeply moved. He looked at his sons again. They were still watching him, waiting for his reaction. One of them reached out and took his hand. The billionaire swallowed hard. The air between them was thick with silence here, the kind that said more than words ever could, and for the first time in years, he realized how much he had missed. To be continued. The next morning, the house felt different. The billionaire sat at the edge of his bed, still thinking about what he had seen the day before. The image replayed in his mind, his maid dancing, his twins laughing, the rhythm of music they couldn't hear but could somehow feel. He couldn't shake it off. He had always been a man who believed money could solve everything, the best schools, the best therapists, the best technology, but he had never seen his son smile like that before. It wasn't because of some expensive gadget or special training. It was because of her. He didn't know whether to feel grateful or embarrassed. He had built an empire but couldn't build a connection with his own children. Downstairs, the maid was busy as usual, cleaning, preparing breakfast, packing small lunchboxes. The twins were still in their pajamas, sitting on the counter, scribbling on a piece of paper with crayons. When the billionaire walked into the kitchen, everyone froze for a second. The maid lowered her eyes. She wasn't sure if she would be scolded for yesterday. She had barely slept, worried that her job, the one that helped her care for her family, might end because of one innocent moment. But the billionaire didn't look angry. He just looked thoughtful. He walked to the counter and looked at what the twins were drawing. It was a picture of 3 stick figures, 2 small ones and a tall one, all holding hands. Around them were colorful circles that looked like music notes. He asked softly, "Did they draw this?" The maid nodded. "Yes, sir. They said it's their dancing family." Something caught in his throat. Family. It had been a long time since he'd heard that word in his home. He cleared his throat and tried to sound composed. "Do they do this often?" "Every day," she said carefully. "Music helps them feel emotions even if they can't hear it. It helps them express themselves. Sometimes they sign the beats. Sometimes they move with the vibrations. It makes them feel alive." He nodded slowly. "I didn't know that." The maid smiled softly. "They never told you because they didn't think you'd understand." Those words hit him like a quiet storm. He stood there for a long moment, watching his sons giggle and bump shoulders. After breakfast, the billionaire sat in his study, staring out the large window. His thoughts drifted between guilt and curiosity. He had built everything in his life with control, precise, planned, perfect. But emotions weren't things you could manage like a business. Later that afternoon, as he prepared to leave for a meeting, he paused by the living room. The twins were playing with blocks and the maid was helping them build what looked like a castle. He could see her face light up when one of them signed something funny. She understood them completely, not through words, but through patience. Before stepping out, he said quietly, "If they like dancing, maybe you can show me sometime." "How they learn?" The maid looked surprised. "Of course, sir. Whenever you like," he nodded and left. But that single line marked the beginning of something new. That night after work, he returned home earlier than usual. The house was dim, and he could hear faint vibrations again. The same rhythm he'd felt before. This time he didn't sneak up. He walked straight to the kitchen. The twins were there again, laughing silently, their feet tapping gently on the floor. The maid turned around when she saw him, expecting him to stop her again, but he didn't. He took off his jacket, placed it on a chair, and stood beside them. The maid hesitated. "Sir, would you like to—" He raised his hand, shaking his head lightly. "Show me how they feel it." She smiled, understanding. She placed one of his hands on the countertop near the speaker. The low beat vibrated softly against his palm. It was faint, almost like a heartbeat. Then one of the twins placed his tiny hand on top of his father's as if to say, "See, Daddy? You can feel it too." The billionaire felt something stir inside him. Not just the rhythm, but the realization of how disconnected he had been from his own children. They had been feeling the world in ways he never tried to understand. The maid clapped her hands lightly, signaling the boys to start moving again. Their faces glowed with joy, and this time the billionaire smiled, a real, unguarded smile. He didn't dance, not yet. But he watched. Closely. Carefully. Like a man trying to learn a new language. The language of love through silence. When the song ended, the maid turned off the speaker. The boys jumped into her arms, laughing soundlessly. The billionaire just stood there, his heart full and heavy all at once. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, "They're happy." The maid nodded. "Yes, sir. They are." He gave a small smile. "Thank you for showing them how to be." For the first time, she saw something in his eyes. Not distance, not authority, but gratitude. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Tomorrow, let's do this again." And as he walked away, the maid couldn't help but smile. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see the world the way his children did. A world full of feeling, not just sound. To be continued. The next few days brought a quiet change inside the mansion. It wasn't sudden, but it was real. The air felt softer. The sound of laughter, silent but full of life, floated through the halls. The billionaire began coming home earlier, sometimes even before sunset. The staff noticed but didn't dare comment. Something about him seemed different. He no longer walked in with his phone glued to his ear or his mind lost in meetings. Instead, he paused near the kitchen doorway, where the maid and the twins would usually spend their evenings. Sometimes they danced, sometimes they played games using their hands and facial expressions. It wasn't just movement, it was communication. He didn't fully understand sign language, but he was trying. Every night he watched closely, learning a little more from the way the maid spoke to the children using her hands, her eyes, and her smile. One evening, as the boys went to bed, he found himself standing by the kitchen window while the maid washed dishes. He cleared his throat softly. "They've been happier lately," he said. The maid nodded, not turning around. "Yes, sir. They've always been full of joy. They just needed someone to see it." He thought about that for a moment. "I suppose. I never looked closely enough." She stopped washing for a second and turned toward him. "Sometimes we don't need to hear people to understand them, sir. We just need to pay attention." The words stayed with him long after she left the room. The next morning, the billionaire made a quiet decision. He called off his usual business lunch and stayed home. He wanted to learn, really learn, how to communicate with his sons. When the maid arrived, she was surprised to see him sitting at the table with a notebook and pen. "Sir?" she asked gently. He smiled awkwardly. "You said they talk with their hands. Maybe you can teach me how." Her eyes softened. "Of course." So they began. She started with simple signs. Hello, thank you, good, love, happy. The billionaire copied her carefully, his large hands clumsy but determined. The twins sat nearby, giggling silently as he tried to mimic their gestures. Every time he got one wrong, they laughed harder, and for the first time, he laughed with them. The maid smiled quietly, watching something she had never seen before, a father learning to speak his children's language. An hour passed quickly. The billionaire leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's harder than I thought," he admitted. "It takes time," the maid said kindly. "They learned because they had no choice. But you're choosing to learn. That means more to them than you think." He looked at her, studying her expression. There was something in her eyes, a depth, a quiet pain that he hadn't noticed before. "You seem to understand them better than anyone," he said softly. "How did you learn all this?" For a moment, the maid hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the edge of a towel. "It's personal, sir," he didn't push. "I understand," he said simply. "But thank you for helping them. For helping me." She smiled faintly, but there was sadness hidden behind it. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, the billionaire sat alone in his study, flipping through the notebook filled with shaky signs he had drawn. Each one reminded him of a word he couldn't speak to his sons before, but now could. He felt proud and guilty. He had spent years building everything the world admired but ignored what mattered most. His children didn't need perfection. They needed connection. He thought about the maid again. Her patience, her calmness, her way of understanding silence. There was something almost familiar in her tenderness toward the twins. It was more than duty, it was love. The next morning he asked her to join him for coffee. It wasn't usual for him to invite his staff to sit with him, and she hesitated. "Please," he said quietly. "You've done more for this family than I ever realized." She sat, unsure of what to expect. He looked at her for a long moment before asking, "You said yesterday, it's personal, why you understand them so well. I don't want to pry, but may I know?" The maid took a deep breath. Her eyes glistened slightly. Because, sir, I had a sister. She was born deaf too. We didn't have money for doctors or special schools, so I learned to speak her language. She taught me patience, love, and how silence can be full of meaning. The billionaire's chest tightened. What happened to her? The maid looked down. She passed away when she was 12. But every time I see your son smile, I feel like a part of her is still here. There was a long pause. The billionaire's eyes softened. I see, he whispered. That's remarkable, she nodded gently. I just don't want your sons to grow up feeling like no one understands them. Because I know what that feels like. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with quiet emotion, different from the cold silence that once filled the house. This silence carried warmth, understanding, respect. The billionaire finally said, "Thank you for telling me, and for staying," she smiled. "Thank you for noticing." As she walked away to prepare breakfast, he sat there for a long time thinking about what she'd said. For the first time in years, he felt something real, not pride, not power, but humility. He realized that sometimes the people who have the least to give the most. And that morning, he promised himself that he would never let his children grow up in silence again. To be continued. The weeks that followed brought a kind of peace the mansion hadn't felt in years. The billionaire had changed, quietly, but deeply. He started spending his mornings with his sons before work. Sometimes he'd help them with drawings. Other times he'd join their little dance sessions. He wasn't good at it, and his moves often made the twins laugh. But that laughter filled the home with warmth. Every evening, the maid would guide him in learning new signs. His hands moved slowly, but each gesture carried meaning. His sons began to understand him better, and for the first time they reached for him not just out of need, but out of love. The maid watched all this quietly, her heart full. She had never imagined that the man who once seemed so distant could become this gentle. One morning, the billionaire decided to surprise his children. He had taken a day off work, something he hadn't done in years. He called the twins into the living room, where the maid had already set up their favorite song. He placed his hands on the counter, feeling the beat. Then awkwardly but sincerely he began to dance, not perfectly but with heart. The twins burst into silent laughter, their faces glowing. The maid stood by, clapping softly, smiling as if watching a miracle unfold. When the song ended, one of the boys signed something fast with his little hands. The billionaire looked confused, turning to the maid. "He said you dance funny," she said with a laugh. The billionaire grinned, pretending to be offended. "Well, maybe he should teach me." The boy nodded eagerly, his small hands showing the beat. They danced again together this time, father, sons, and maid, not as employer and workers, but as people sharing the same heartbeat. For a few minutes, no one thought about wealth, silence, or difference. It was just love in motion. That night, after the boys went to sleep, the maid stayed behind to clean up the kitchen. The billionaire walked in holding 2 cups of tea. "You've been working too hard," he said, setting 1 cup on the counter. She smiled shyly. "It's nothing, sir. The boys make it easy." He looked at her for a long moment before saying softly, "You've done more for this family than I ever could. I thought I was giving them everything, but I wasn't giving them the most important thing, my time." She lowered her eyes. "Sometimes time means more than money," he nodded. "I see that now." For a moment there was silence between them. Not the cold kind, but gentle and full of gratitude. But the next morning brought something unexpected. A black car pulled up in front of the mansion. The maid had just finished serving breakfast when a tall woman stepped out, well-dressed, confident, and smiling politely. She introduced herself as a representative from a new private academy for children with special needs. The billionaire had once contacted them months ago but never followed up. They had just reopened enrollment. She spoke warmly, promising the best technology, personal tutors, and full-time therapy for the twins. "They'll learn faster, live more independently," she said. The billionaire nodded thoughtfully. He wanted the best for his boys, but as the woman spoke, he noticed the maid's expression. She stayed silent, but her eyes dropped, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. After the woman left, the billionaire asked softly, "You don't think it's a good idea?" She hesitated. "It's not my place to say, sir. I'm asking you, he insisted gently. She looked up, eyes uncertain. It's a wonderful school, sir, but they already have a place where they're happy. They found a rhythm here. I'm just afraid if they go away so soon they'll lose that connection. With you. Her words hit him like a wave. He had spent years being absent, and only recently had he started to truly know his sons. If they went away now, that fragile bond might fade again. But part of him still felt guilty. They deserve the best, he said quietly. The maid smiled faintly. Yes, sir. But sometimes the best thing isn't far away. It's already here. He didn't reply. He just looked out the window where his sons were playing on the lawn, laughing in their own silent world. The house had never been this peaceful. The twins were thriving. Their laughter filled the rooms. Their drawings now decorated the walls, and even the staff noticed the change. The billionaire seemed lighter, happier, more human. He smiled more often, spoke gently, and spent evenings sitting cross-legged on the floor with his sons, learning sign language one gesture at a time. The maid continued her daily routine, always quiet, always humble. But deep down, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. She wasn't just working in a house anymore. She was part of something meaningful. Everything felt perfect. Until one morning, a small misunderstanding began to shake that peace. It started when the billionaire received a message from his business associate. He was planning a large charity gala to support children with disabilities. The billionaire wanted to attend with his sons, to raise awareness about deaf education. He asked the maid to prepare them, saying warmly, "You'll come too. You've been a big part of their journey." Her eyes widened. "Sir, me? I'm not," he smiled. "You are family. You belong there." Tears almost filled her eyes, but she just nodded with gratitude. The next few days were full of excitement. The twins practiced a small dance they wanted to perform for the event, something the maid had choreographed to help them express music through rhythm and movement. But one afternoon, while the billionaire was out, a relative came to visit. His younger sister, a woman with sharp eyes and colder manners. She had never liked the maid. When she saw her in the living room helping the twins rehearse, she frowned. "What are you doing?" The maid stood up quickly, startled. "Just helping them with their routine, ma'am." "With music?" The sister snapped. "They can't even hear it. Why waste time?" The maid swallowed hard. "They can feel it. It helps them understand emotions." The sister crossed her arms. "That's not your job. You're a maid, not a teacher. Don't cross boundaries." The maid tried to explain, but her voice trembled. "I only do what makes them happy." The sister walked off with a cold laugh. "Be careful. Not everyone sees it that way." The words stung. That evening, the billionaire returned home to an unexpected storm. His sister had pulled him aside. "I saw your maid in the living room dancing again," she said, acting like she's part of the family. "You're getting too close. It doesn't look right," he frowned. "You're overthinking it. She's helping the boys. They adore her." His sister's voice hardened. "You don't know what people might say. A maid dancing around your house and spending all her time with your kids, it's not professional." He clenched his jaw. "She's done more for them than anyone else. Don't turn kindness into gossip." But her words left a shadow in his mind. That night, as he sat in his study, he found himself replaying the conversation. He didn't doubt the maid's honesty, but he couldn't ignore how fragile reputation could be in his world. One rumor could ruin her or him. He was still lost in thought when he heard a faint knock on the door. The maid stepped in slowly. "Sir, may I speak to you?" He nodded. She clasped her hands nervously. "I just wanted to say, if I've done anything wrong, I'm sorry. I never meant to cross any lines. I only care for the boys. They mean everything to me." He looked up surprised. "Who told you this?" She hesitated. "Your sister said some things. I don't want trouble for anyone." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy. Then he said softly, "You've done nothing wrong. Don't let anyone make you doubt your heart." She exhaled shakily, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." He smiled faintly. "And thank you for making this house feel alive again." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I just want them to feel loved." He glanced at a photo of his family on the wall, taken before his wife had passed away years ago. "You've given them what I couldn't," he said quietly. The maid looked down. Sometimes love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. The next morning, the billionaire's sister left the mansion, but her words lingered. The maid noticed how the air felt different. The billionaire wasn't distant, but he seemed thoughtful, almost guarded. Still, he kept his promise. The gala went on as planned. The twins stood on stage, barefoot, feeling the rhythm through the floor. The maid guided them with graceful gestures from the side, her eyes full of pride. The audience fell silent, then burst into applause. Even without sound, the children's joy spoke louder than words. As the lights dimmed, the billionaire looked at the maid and his sons, tears gathering in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't care what the world thought. He realized something simple but powerful. When love is pure, it doesn't need to be explained. But just as the evening ended in triumph, another surprise awaited them at home. A letter placed neatly on the kitchen counter. The maid's uniform folded beside it. A note, written in her careful handwriting, read, "Thank you for letting me be part of your world. But it's time I leave before I become the reason for any misunderstanding. Please take care of the boys. They're special. They'll always carry the music in their hearts." The billionaire froze. The twins ran around looking for her, confused, their small hands signing her name again and again. But she was gone. To be continued. The next morning was quieter than ever. No music. No laughter. No movement in the kitchen. The twins sat at the table, their faces blank, their hands motionless. The house that once felt alive now seemed hollow again. Even the sunlight coming through the windows felt dimmer. The billionaire held the maid's letter in his trembling hand, reading it again and again, as if the words might somehow change. "Thank you for letting me be part of your world. But it's time I leave before I become the reason for any misunderstanding." He couldn't believe it. She was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just a quiet exit. He looked at his sons, who kept signing her name, their eyes full of confusion and tears. They didn't understand why the person who made their world colorful had suddenly disappeared. He swallowed hard. "I'll find her," he whispered. "I promise." For days he called every contact, checked every agency, every bus line that might have taken her out of town. But there was no trace. Meanwhile, the house grew silent again. The twins stopped dancing. The speaker sat untouched on the counter. The drawings on the fridge began to curl at the edges. The billionaire spent his evenings staring at the empty kitchen doorway where she used to stand, humming softly while cooking. He realized that the rhythm she brought into their lives wasn't just music. It was meaning. She had shown them how to feel the world, how to love without needing sound, and now, without her, it all felt empty. One afternoon, while driving through a nearby town, he stopped at a small community center. A banner outside read, "Dance for All, a program for deaf and disabled children." Something about those words made his heart race. He parked his car and walked inside quietly. The faint beat of music vibrated through the floor. Children were dancing, some with hearing aids, some moving by touch, all smiling. And there, in the middle of the room, guiding them with graceful movements and bright eyes, was her, the maid. She was wearing a simple dress, barefoot, showing the children how to feel rhythm through the floor. Her face glowed with joy. For a moment, the billionaire just watched. His throat tightened, his eyes burned. When the song ended, she turned and froze. Their eyes met. She stepped back, unsure. "Sir, what are you doing here?" He took a slow breath. "Looking for you." She looked down. "You shouldn't have. I didn't want to cause trouble." "Your sister," he interrupted softly. "She doesn't live here. This is my home, my family, and you're part of it." She blinked, stunned. "Sir, I didn't mean to cross lines. He shook his head. "You never crossed any lines. You drew the ones that showed us where love really lives." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I was afraid I'd ruin what you built." He smiled gently. "You didn't ruin anything. You built everything that matters." The children in the background began clapping, sensing the emotion between them even without sound. The maid wiped her eyes, smiling through her tears. He continued softly. "The boys miss you. They haven't danced since you left." Her face broke. "They stopped dancing," he nodded. "They're waiting for their teacher, and so am I." That evening, she returned to the mansion. The twins saw her through the window and ran toward her before she even stepped inside. They wrapped their little arms around her legs, tears streaming down their faces as they signed her name again and again. The billionaire watched from the doorway, emotion swelling in his chest. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence said it all. The maid knelt down and hugged both boys tightly. "I'm here," she whispered softly. "I'm not leaving again." Later that night, the house was alive once more. The music speaker played softly as the vibrations filled the kitchen. The maid danced again, the twins following her lead. The billionaire stood nearby, his hand resting on the countertop, feeling the rhythm with them. Then, for the first time ever, he joined them, not as a father trying to understand, but as someone who finally did. He moved with them, awkward but smiling, his laughter silent yet full of life. The twins beamed, clapping their hands, and the maid laughed through her tears. For the first time, all three of them were in perfect harmony. No sound, no words, just love. Months later, the billionaire turned one of the mansion's empty halls into a small learning center, a space where children like his sons could feel music, dance, and express themselves freely. He named it the House of Rhythm, and on a small plaque near the door, he wrote, "Dedicated to those who teach us to hear with our hearts." Every weekend, the maid ran the classes there. The twins helped her, showing new children how to move with the music. The billionaire often stood at the doorway smiling, sometimes joining them, sometimes just watching quietly. The mansion was no longer a silent place filled with wealth. It had become a home filled with meaning, and every time the maid danced with his sons, the billionaire remembered the day he walked in on them and realized that sometimes the most beautiful moments begin as misunderstandings, because love doesn't always need sound. Sometimes it only needs heart.